Hello, I'm Jan Szerowiński. Welcome on board the Eastern Express. And as always, I hope you enjoy the journey. In this episode, we're delving into a topic hotter than a car left out in a hot summer sun, yet seemingly as sleep-inducing as watching paint dry. The US Congress's inability to make decisions, specifically their indecision on new military aid packages for Ukraine, Israel, countries of the Indo-Pacific region, and a mix of issues lumped together like the world's most geopolitically charged stew. Now, from a European perspective, the most eye-catching issue is, without a doubt, American military support to Ukraine being halted. And that issue has been stalled for a very long time, largely due to the polarization of the US House of Representatives. To make matters worse, the Biden administration is sending clear signals against Ukraine attacking Russian refineries. So, let's take a look at our report to find out more and where are we heading on this particular story.
In a recent statement, U.S. Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin criticized Ukraine's actions on oil refineries in Russia, warning of potential repercussions on global energy markets. His statement represents the Biden administration's stance on the matter, already voiced on multiple occasions.
Hey, John, there's a report that the U.S. was urging Ukraine to stop attacks on Russia's energy infrastructure out of fear that it's going to drive up oil prices. Can you confirm those conversations are happening?
I'm not going to speak to the specifics in that press reporting. The only thing I would tell you is what I've said before. We do not encourage or enable the Ukrainian military to conduct strikes inside Russia.
Austin's remarks come amidst Ukraine's strategic strikes on Russian infrastructure. The American official advised Ukraine to focus on military targets as a way to alter the course of the war. Ukraine, however, is not so keen to comply.
Firstly, these are absolutely legitimate targets from the military point of view. Secondly, we understand the calls of the US partners, but at the same time, we are fighting with the capabilities, resources, and practices that we have.
The Biden administration has been actively working on combating inflation and managing gas prices affecting American consumers. Disruptions in Russian oil production, however, hinder that effort. Despite these tensions, the U.S. remains a staunch supporter of Ukraine. In the same statement, Austin urged Congress to approve additional military aid for the war-torn country. His comments, however, were met with criticism from some senators, who accused the Biden administration of hindering Ukraine's effective efforts to further the presidential political agenda in an election year, with gas prices a sensitive issue for voters.
And now, as always, it's time to delve into the issue in greater detail. So, let's begin. Remember when the United States, in its political and diplomatic superhero cosplay, initially gave Ukraine the ability to resist Russia effectively? In turn, they bought time for Europe to figure out if they wanted to send actual weapons or just promise to ship, let's just say, conceptual helmets. Yeah, that time has passed, and now Europe is stepping up, though not without bad apples of its own. We're looking at you, Hungary and Slovakia. The continent's defense industry is buzzing with activity, from Czech ammunition initiatives to French artillery efforts. However, without the US, or with its dragging its financial feet, the long-term picture starts looking as bleak as the Siberian winter. This indecision might be a blow not just to supplying Ukrainians, but also to the transatlantic political space. Europe is trying to adapt, considering concepts of strategic autonomy. But that's a plan with a timeline possibly outpacing Ukraine's immediate needs amidst Russian aggression. Let's not forget the delightful shambles that is US politics, recently at least, with the election season heating up and Donald Trump cementing his position as the leader of the Republican Party. The absence of Nikki Haley from the race leaves very little room to counter the accusations being leveled by him against military aid for Ukraine. There have been a lot of these recently, at least indirectly. Any attempt to support Ukraine now risks being labeled a Democrat plot, adding fuel to the already raging fire of political polarization. And then there is Israel, creating its own set of complications alongside Ukraine. Biden's support for Israel following attacks from Hamas was strong, but the ongoing conflict and tragic deaths, including that of a Polish charity worker, raise questions in the United States about continued military support. But as we look to Congress, there might be a glimmer of hope. The House, despite its recent resemblance to a reality TV show, might tackle these aid packages after the holiday break. But although Speaker Mike Johnson has hinted at movement on the issue, that does not guarantee it will pass through the heavily divided Congress. So where does this leave us then? Both parties, amidst their internal chaos, recognize the need for military aid. They are navigating the minefield of political and moral considerations before the elections. The ultimate goal is clear: prevent the erosion of US global standing, ensuring that aid for Ukraine and others isn't just on the table, but is served up in a way that satisfies all palates. And joining us now to shed more light on the issue is Rostislav Hotin from Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty. Hello and welcome to Eastern Express.
Hello.
So one of the defining features of any tragedy is that it could have been avoided. And if we adopt this understanding, then the destruction of one of the biggest power plants in Ukraine is definitely a tragedy. Even though no one died in the attack, we still have many very serious, very acute problems resulting from this. Now, what would you say about this, especially in the context of air defenses and support for Ukraine? To what extent is this something that we really could have avoided, we as the collective West?
Yes, if Ukraine would have had enough Patriot systems for air defense and enough missiles for Patriot systems, which are in Ukraine, the Tripilla thermal power station would have been protected better, because it's the biggest electricity producing plant in central Ukraine. Used to be, actually, Chernobyl used to be the biggest, but it was closed, of course, nuclear station. And now it was Tripilla, 13 kilometers from Kiev on the Dnieper River, the biggest energy producing plant in central Ukraine. 3 regions relying on it: Kiev region, Cherkasy region, Zhytomyr region. So the whole central Ukraine was dependent on the electricity from this thermal power plant. And Ukraine already complained that it had not enough Patriots to defend the energy infrastructure.
Yes, Dmytro Kuleba said that, didn't he?
Yes, yes. During winter months, the most difficult months, of course, Ukraine was able to protect. But then the stockpile of missiles for Patriots expired, and also there were no supplies of new missiles for Patriots, for IRST, air defense systems, and also Ukraine needs at least 7 Patriots out of 100 which are deployed in the European countries. So Ukraine badly needs Patriots to protect its infrastructure, energy infrastructure. So this thermal power plant in Tripilla near Kiev was completely destroyed out, kind of for a long time. Unlikely Ukraine will be able to restore it and to restore production of electricity at this thermal plant even for the next winter.
And just a quick question. Poland's Foreign Minister Radosław Sikorski said that this was a war crime. Would you agree with this assessment?
Of course, if you compare, Ukrainian strikes against Russia and Russian strike against Ukraine, it's completely different, because Ukraine strikes Russian battleships, Ukraine strikes airfields, military airfields, military fighter jets, and so on and so forth. So it's primarily military infrastructure which is hit by Ukraine, while Russia is targeting apartments block in Ukraine where people, civilians, live, and also energy infrastructure to make life harsher and harsher for ordinary Ukrainians.
What about the Russian refineries? Because the US administration seems to say, look, we don't want you to hit these refineries. To what extent would you say there is a difference there? Because if you have a power plant, generally, I mean, the nuclear power plant obviously is a very specific example there, but any power plant is intended to deliver electricity to the population. Would you say that an oil refinery falls into the same category, or is there a difference there?
There is a difference, because oil refineries which Ukraine hit, it hit about there were strikes against up to 20 oil refineries or oil depots in Russia since the beginning of this year, and 15% of Russian oil refinery industry was knocked out by Ukrainian drones. So these are the engine. These are the oil refineries which supply fuel for the Russian military engine, war machine. So Russian tanks depend on diesel fuel, Russian armored personnel carriers, and so on, so forth. So this is the bloodline, blood system of the Russian war machine, the oil in Russia. So Ukraine, while targeting these oil refineries and oil depots, Ukraine was intended to knock out Russian war machine.
So precisely, I mean, it's important to emphasize this, that there are differences there, and also that Russia is trying to make a profit, selling oil, and it's not an essential part of its infrastructure. I mean, people could live without oil, without the proceeds from the sale of oil especially, but if Ukraine does not have electricity producing infrastructure, then people would not be able to conduct their daily lives, right? I mean, let's move now to the next part of this discussion. You've mentioned Patriot missiles. Now, most of these missiles and launchers are now in the United States. It is estimated that the US has over 400 active launchers in active service. We're not even mentioning the total quantity of launchers produced, so many of them could be in storage. What are the prospects of the US resuming its support efforts for Ukraine, given what's happening in Congress and what's still happening there, even though Speaker Mike Johnson recently said, yes, we're going to deal with that, we're going to vote on this, and still nothing happens?
Yeah, everything depends on the U.S. military aid for Ukraine. And just want to remind you that this package of more than $60 billion, which is assigned for Ukraine and which hasn't been approved yet by the U.S. Congress totally, finally, the lion's share of this money, of this package, will go to U.S. military producers, to the Pentagon, which has stockpiles of ammunition, arms and ammunition for Ukraine. It's not direct aid to Ukrainian budget or to Ukrainian defense ministry. Spend this money as you want. No, it's not the case. This money will primarily go to American military industrial complex, to Pentagon, and then who will release later the military aid for Ukraine. Of course, America has more than 400 Patriot systems in its disposal, but also European countries, European NATO members, they have more than 100 of them, and war is ranging quite far away from some of them. From France.
That's a very good point.
Yes, and Ukraine doesn't ask dozens of Patriot systems, just five, at least 5 or 7, preferably, Patriot systems to close the sky over Ukraine to protect energy infrastructure.
Do you think Europe can deliver? We recently had an initiative by Guy Verhofstadt, the former Prime Minister of Belgium, who told the European Parliament that, financial issues will be suspended. The adoption of certain resolutions on financial issues will be suspended until these Patriot systems are secured from countries within the European Union that have them. Do you think that this has a chance of succeeding? Would you think, for example, that it would be easier for European countries to then purchase additional systems from the United States, because it would no longer be the question of basically any sort of US aid to Ukraine? Instead, it would be just a commercial transaction between allies within NATO, which sounds like something easier to achieve, doesn't it?
Yes, of course. If America is thinking for too long, Europe should step in because Ukraine is closer to Europe. Ukraine wants to join the European Union. Ukraine is a partner of Europe, feels itself as a part of European family. So Europeans should step in while America is thinking for too long. And I hope that on the 22nd of April, there will be a meeting of EU foreign and defense ministers ministers and the Ukrainian Foreign Minister Kuleba and Defense Minister Umerov to attend this meeting. And hopefully there is a kind of hope that the EU will finally release at least 5-7 Patriot systems for Ukraine to close the sky. Because, for instance, this thermal power station, which was hit yesterday by Russian missiles, it was protected from drone attacks, but Russia hit it with a newly designed X-69 cruise missiles, which are very difficult to detect, but Patriots could do it.
It's a new missile, actually. What does it tell us about sanctions? Western sanctions were supposed to bring Russia to its knees, or at least to cripple its economy, especially the military-industrial complex. Now, Russia comes up with a new missile. This missile was not around at the beginning of the conflict. So they apparently did, through all the research and development, finished it at least, and introduced it to the armed forces, basically gave them a new toy to play with and to attack civilian targets with. Does it mean that sanctions are not quite as effective as some commentators would like us to believe?
Yes, sanctions are effective, but there are ways to avoid them, to circumvent them. For instance, with Chinese help, with in some Russian missiles, Ukrainians later, or debris of missiles, Ukrainians later find chips, Western-produced chips, or other materials from. So there are ways to circumvent the sanctions through third countries, especially China and other countries, which are kind of partners of Russian Federation.
That's a major problem. One final question. We have less than a minute left. What do you think will be the final outcome of the conflict? Do you believe that Ukraine will still be able to get all its lands back, and will it be supported in this endeavor by its allies?
Everything is dependent on Western aid. Ukraine badly needs Western arms and ammunition. Without this, and financial support, of course, without this, Ukrainians will be fighting very hard, but it will be difficult to sustain Russian pressure, because Russia is more powerful from military point of view and has more resources than Ukraine, of course.
Although it has less resources than the West, even than the European Union countries economically, which we should remember about so that we adopt the proper strategy to help Ukraine win, and not just some vague statement like as long as it takes, etc. Right? Rostislav Khotin was our guest today here on TVP World. Thank you very much for joining us and for sharing your expertise.
Thank you.
And now we're moving on to Eastern News Flash, bringing you the latest selection of all the other stories from the East that you really don't want to miss. The safety of the Zaporizhia nuclear power plant in Ukraine has become a significant concern. Rafael Grossi, head of the International Atomic Energy Agency, has emphasized the critical nature of the situation, indicating that the latest assaults could open a new perilous chapter of the war.
Since the onset of the war in Ukraine, Zaporizhia nuclear power plant has become a target of sporadic attacks, raising fears of a nuclear disaster. The IAEA seeks to prevent the strikes from escalating. On April 8th, head of the agency Rafael Grossi issued a severe warning after the plant, largest in Europe and under Russian control since February 2022, was targeted by drones. An IAEA expert team confirmed at least 3 direct hits on the plant's main reactor containment structures, marking a significant increase in nuclear safety and security risks. While one strike of the reactor dome of Unit 6 did not compromise nuclear safety, Grossi said that any attack on the plant's primary containment structure significantly heightens the risk of a nuclear incident. He has also called for military restraint and urged the global community to seek de-escalation of what he describes as a very serious situation.
According to the latest report by the independent watchdog Freedom House, democratic governance in Central Europe and Central Asia has seen a decline for the 20th year in a row. The report attributes this trend to aggressive actions by states such as Moscow's invasion of Ukraine and Azerbaijan's military operation in Nagorno-Karabakh.
Out of the 29 nations in transit, which include former Soviet Union and Warsaw Pact countries, 10 experienced a drop in the democracy scores in 2023, while only 5 showed improvements. Russia and Azerbaijan were particularly noted for their wars of aggression, exemplifying the disregard of autocrats for human rights and pluralistic societies. The report named Turkmenistan, Tajikistan, Azerbaijan and Russia as the countries with the lowest democracy scores. Serbia experienced the most significant drop due to factors like election fraud, media control, weakened local governments and diminishing judicial independence. In contrast, Ukraine was noted as a positive example, with improvements in its democracy score following the government's efforts in judicial reform and anti-corruption measures. Estonia, Latvia and Slovenia were recognized as the countries with the highest democracy scores, indicating a healthy state of democratic governance. The report's co-author Mike Smeltzer stressed the importance of democratic states taking a proactive stance in regional security, particularly in supporting Ukraine. He emphasized that failing to defend democracy now would lead to greater challenges in curbing authoritarian expansion in future.
An international team of researchers have compiled 3 years of cybercrime study into the first ever World Cybercrime Index, which identifies key cybercrime hotspots. According to the report, Ukraine, Russia and China remain top sources of global cybercrime threat.
Cybercrime has largely gone under the radar, since offenders often mask their physical locations by hiding behind fake profiles and other means of evading detection. The new study, however, might shed some light on the phenomena. Conducted by scholars from the University of Oxford and the University of New South Wales, Canberra, the research identifies Russia as the #1 source of cybercrime threat, with Ukraine, China, the United States and Nigeria also ranking high on the list. The report was based on the insights of nearly 100 cybercrime experts, who were tasked with evaluating the top origins of 5 key types of cybercrime. Then they identified countries considered to be the most significant sources of each of these types of cybercrime and ranked each country according to the impact, professionalism and technical skills of its cybercriminals. Authors say that the study will enable the public and private sectors to focus their resources on key cybercrime hubs and spend less time and funds on cybercrime countermeasures in countries where the problem is not as significant.
Vladimir Kara-Murza, a Russian opposition politician, has been subjected to brutal prison conditions, according to his wife, Yevgenia Kara-Murza. She has revealed that her husband had spent the last 6 months in solitary confinement, which was initially termed a punitive isolation cell, but later renamed to circumvent legal restrictions on the duration of such confinement.
Russian opposition politician Vladimir Kara-Murza is currently serving a 25-year sentence for criticizing President Vladimir Putin and Russia's invasion of Ukraine. He has been charged with discrediting the Russian army and with treason for the speeches he gave outside Russia. His wife, Yevgenia Kara-Murza, has recently expressed grave concerns over the health of her husband, who suffers from conditions developed after 2 suspected poisoning incidents. She believes that Russian authorities are using solitary confinement to exacerbate the health conditions of prisoners. Despite the harsh conditions, Kara-Murza manages to maintain a sense of humor in his letter to his children, describing cats sunbathing on the metal mesh over the prison yard. However, the fact that he's being denied medical assistance remains a serious concern for his family and supporters.
And for this episode of Eastern Express, it's the end of the line. Please stay with us here on TVP World for more latest news and updates.